Thanks for calling Tooties Tooting Tutors. This is Tootie. How can I help you?
Hi there. This is Noah calling from the Math Club.
I'm sorry, can you speak up? There's a lot of tooting going on here.
Sure. This is Noah calling from the Math Club.
Oh, hi. What can I do for you?
Well, I was wondering if it would be possible to interview you for our show.
Me?
If you're Tootie from Tooties Tooting Tutors, then yeah.
That's me. But can you hold on a second? Hey, Rudy and Trudy. Don't look so moody. That toot was a beauty. Okay, sorry about that. You were saying?
Yeah, I'd like to do an interview with you for our show.
What show again?
The Math Club.
Are you doing an episode about the math in music?
Music? No.
So why do you want to interview me?
Well, the goal of our show is to make math more accessible and more engaging to more people.
And how would interviewing me help with that?
Your work kind of fits with a theme. We did an episode last fall where we interviewed the co-founder of Math for Love, who makes games and other resources to show kids how fun math learning can be. We did another one with an expert from Dyscalculia Services who told us all about how she helps students with math learning disabilities. And then just last month, we put out an episode featuring a panel of teachers discussing their experiences with math education.
And you're calling me today because...
I was hoping to round out the topic by talking with a professional tutor about what kind of math work you do with your students.
Math work?
Doesn't Tooties Tooting Tutors tutor students in math?
Ah, I see what's going on here. No, we don't have that kind of tutor here. We're not tutors. We're tutors. As in tutors who tutor the flute.
Say what now?
You know, like the old tongue twister. A tutor who tooted the flute tried to tutor two tutors to toot.
Oh my goodness. I'm so embarrassed. I meant to call a math tutor.
Can't help you there. If you want to learn how to play hot cross buns on the flute, then come on down. We'll have you rootin' and tootin' in no time. But if it's a math tutor you're looking for, then you probably should call Mathnasium. They're just a few doors down, and they do tutor students in math.
Hey, that's a great suggestion. Thanks.
Don't mention it.
But while I have you on the phone, I've always wondered, is it harder to toot or to tutor two tutors to toot?
They're both pretty easy once you know how. It's that math tutoring that's the real challenge.
Hey there, Math Club. I know, I bet you were hoping to hear the sultry sound of Pete's voice, but he is out for one more episode. Good news, though. He'll be back from his vacation and returning to the Math Club in time for our next episode in 2 weeks. Now, even though Tooties Tooting Tutors was made up for our opening sketch, Mathnasium is a real math learning center that has a location here in my hometown of Livermore, California. I have driven past it about 1 million times, but I never really knew what kind of work they do with students who attend their program. So while starting to plan for this episode, I looked them up online, and one of the first things I noticed was that every single comment I found was positive. On our local Rants and Raves Facebook group, I found several parents talking about how much they and their children loved their experience with Mathnasium, and many of them mentioned a specific person, the owner of the Livermore location, Jonathan Bleecker.
He was very personable. My husband and I both really liked his personal touch and the way he oversaw his math center.
That was Tiffany Castro, a local parent whose son started going to Mathnasium during the summer between elementary and middle school.
Well, it started after the pandemic. My son Isaiah really was starting to struggle in math, which had actually been one of his best subjects previously. So I was asking around and I found a lot of positive comments about Mathnasium. I wanted to prepare him for 6th grade going into middle school. And I brought Isaiah in and he just really thrived with the program.
And there were many other comments, just like Tiffany's, complimenting Jonathan and his staff everywhere I looked online. It made me wonder, what was it about Jonathan and his approach to tutoring that earned him virtually unanimous approval and appreciation from the parents who'd worked with him? So I reached out and invited Jonathan to join us today to discuss his philosophy on math instruction. Now, keep in mind that Mathnasium is not a sponsor of our show. The intent today is to pick Jonathan's brain and find out what he believes makes for a good math tutor. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce my guest for this episode, Jonathan Bleecker. Welcome to the Math Club, Jonathan.
Hi, happy to be here.
Glad to have you. So, Jonathan, before we get too much into the specifics of Mathnasium and what exactly it is you do there, could you tell us a little bit first about your personal history with math and what made you decide to open up a math tutoring center?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a train wreck. Well, maybe not a train wreck, more like a fender bender or a series of fender benders. Everything I've done that's led me to this point, I've just sort of fallen into. So it sort of starts with grad school, I suppose. I went to Santa Cruz for my PhD. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to finish my PhD because the Great Recession hit. My particular year was very attractive to cut because most of my year had already been granted a master's degree, including myself, but the school hadn't invested a lot of time in us beyond that point. So it was sort of that year was an exercise in just watching and hoping as various compatriots of mine got dropped off. They lost their funding. They didn't get kicked out, but it's essentially the same thing. And eventually it was my turn. And I found myself without the degree that I was expecting to have. So here I am in the middle of the recession. I don't have the PhD. I have a master's degree. I sort of licked my wounds and sulked for a good amount of time. I told myself this story that no one's going to want to hire me because it's not a good time and I don't have any experience. So I went to the safe bet. I decided, I'll just temporarily, or at least I thought it was going to be temporary, get a job as a math tutor. So I thought it was a sure thing. So it was. I got a job at a Mathnasium in Pleasanton, and it was awesome. I loved it. Eventually, I did end up as the center director for the owner there, but it was a dead end, and I didn't really have any ideas beyond just doing what I was doing. I was in a comfortable rut, but I don't think it was good for my emotional health or for my future.
So you found yourself working at Mathnasium in Pleasanton, which for those of you who aren't from the Bay Area, Pleasanton is one town over from Livermore.
Corman's address is near Kapaa'a. Is it Kapaa'a or Kapaa'a?
How did that evolve from you working at the Mathnasium in Pleasanton to you deciding to open your own Mathnasium here in Livermore?
Yeah, it's the kind of job that's very fulfilling. It's emotionally fulfilling. It provides you with sustenance for the soul, but it's not financially rewarding. And I needed to do something else. I stayed as a center director there for 2 years, but eventually my family pressured me to move on. I started the process of getting a teaching credential at that point. I had an opportunity to work at our local high school, or one of them, as a long-term sub while I was in the process of applying for my credential, and I hated it. I thought it was miserable. I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. I thought I could probably make it a better experience because I know that traditionally it's really hard your first year. But regardless, I ended up not wanting to do that. So my dad said, look, you don't want to get the credential, but you have to do something. You liked Mathnasium. Why don't we open a Mathnasium together? And that's why I started one.
Something that I saw on your biography page on the Mathnasium website is that you said, I specifically chose to open a Mathnasium because the program is amazing. The curriculum makes teaching easy, leaving us to focus on bringing joy to our kids. And I love that sentiment. We've had other guests on the show, most notably Dan Finkel from the organization Math for Love, who spoke at great length about how if there's no joy there, if there's no fun there, it puts such a damper on the possibility of learning. So can you talk a little bit about your philosophy about the importance of bringing joy to the learning?
Yeah, I mean, it's not complicated. What I'm about to say is not particularly groundbreaking, but you have to be successful to enjoy yourself, but you also have to enjoy yourself to be successful. So there's always this balance that you're trying to strike, especially as a teacher. I want my kids to have fun, but I want it to be a serious environment. And we're always trying to calibrate towards that middle ground.
In looking at parent comments online, I noticed that many of them mentioned that they really appreciated your manner and your approach to how you worked with their children on the content. At the top of this episode, we heard a little bit from Tiffany Castro, whose son went through your program. Let's hear a little bit more about what she had to say.
Well, I loved his customer service skills. He was very personable. I really liked the fact that he explained everything to me about his program. And when Isaiah was going through the program, he would keep me updated on how well he was progressing.
So how would you describe your approach? And I mean that either your personal approach or the approach that you've learned from working with Mathnasium.
I think what the kids probably like most about me when I work with them, I don't think of them as kids. I don't know if that makes sense. I try to think of them just as other people that happen to think differently and have different desires. I think when you come into teaching and you're working with kids, there's this temptation to really put yourself above and beyond them as an other, as someone who's of a higher stature and that they're here to listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
I try not to make that assumption. I try not to start from that point when I'm working with kids. So when I talk to them just like I was talking to someone on the street. I talk to them like I've known them for a million years. And it instantly disarms them and makes them understand that they're welcome here and that I do think of them as another person. I do value them as another person. I think that's a really important element whenever you're dealing with not just students, but just people in general.
I love what you just had to say there. It reminds me of when I was working on my teaching credential back in the 90s, something that my advisor said to me. She said, when I come and observe you, you tend to call your students boys and girls, and then they act like boys and girls.
Quiet.
But you might notice that if you refer to them as ladies and gentlemen, they will act more like ladies and gentlemen.
Pardon me, would you have any Grey Poupon? But of course.
And I feel a little bit like what you're saying is another side of that same coin.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, there are these average differences between groups of people. You have to acknowledge them. But the differences between individuals is greater still. Again, I'm not giving sage advice here. I think this is common knowledge, but you just have to treat people as just another person and try to get to know who they are. And that's true even with your students.
I'm already hearing some of your ideas about what makes for a positive relationship between a tutor and a student. Are there other qualities that you think make for a good tutor? For example, when you're hiring at your center, that you look for in a tutor that help you decide whether you want to hire this person or not, or whether you think they're going to be a good tutor in your program?
Yeah, I think there are so many things that I'm looking for. But if I had to just pick one, I think teaching is more art than science. You can try to trap teaching in a box. You can try to come up with theories of education. And it's not that those pursuits aren't worthwhile. But at the end of the day, for the teachers that are actually delivering the lesson is all about communication. And communication is nuanced. So it is art. It isn't necessarily so much science. And with any art, you have to be willing and you have to have this desire to fine tune your craft. You have to have this hunger where you try something and then you think about it, you reflect on it, you try a different ingredient, you try a different order in which you explain things. You have to be that teacher that wants to do better every day. So I'm trying to look for individuals that are excited to teach, that are excited to work with kids. And people, it's hard. In an interview, they're obviously putting their best foot forward, but I'm doing my best to discern, is this the kind of person who's really going to try hard and to grow day after day, year after year? That would be the number one thing.
And that makes a lot of sense. Do the students who come to Mathnasium always work with the same person once they get started? Like, do you match this student up with this tutor and that's their tutor, or do they work with different people every time they come in?
Yeah, it's different people every time they come in. A big part of our model is flexibility. So we have students that come in different days, different times, week after week. The parents control their own schedule. It's just, incumbent upon them to make sure that they're coming often enough. But they can come Tuesday, Thursday, one week. They could come Wednesday, Saturday, another. So it is impossible because of the variability of attendance. to have the same instructors with the same students. But I actually think of that as a strength, not a weakness, because then the kids are coming to a community. They're not coming to a single person. They're coming to meet with the folks at Mathnasium. It's a small team. They get to know all of us. So there's this real feeling that they're being taken care of by a group of people rather than just a single person.
I love that you used the word community there. My co-host Pete, who is not here with us today, and I are constantly talking about how the Math Club is a community effort. That, of course, the two of us are doing the work to create and produce the episodes. But whenever we need something that's outside of our wheelhouse, for example, if we need music for an episode, we went to a friend of my son's who's a talented composer, and he's the one who composed and played the opening music to our show. When we need people to do voices, like, for example, the person who played Tootie in our opening sketch today, we don't go out there and hire actors. I was a theater major back in college, and I have friends who are actors, and I went to a friend of mine named Ed and brought him in. In fact, we've had several of our friends appear on the show in different roles, and we both really feel like what we love about that is the sense of community that we're building. And that's also one of the reasons I wanted to invite you on the show, is because you seem to me to be a member of our local math community. And I just love that you brought the word community in and expressed how important that is to you in your work with your students.
Yeah, I mean, Livermore, we're really blessed. Livermore is just, it's a great town. The people here are so friendly and welcoming and helpful. My students, my parents, there's a lot of horror stories from teachers about difficult parents, difficult students, but I can't say that I have a lot of horror stories. I think the parents here are awesome, and the kids also awesome. Really blessed.
So speaking of the kids, would you say that there's a particular reason that most of the parents that you work with initially decide to bring their students into Mathnasium?
I actually am happy to say that there isn't any one particular reason. That we have kids that are in different circumstances that come to us for different reasons. Number one would be kids that are clearly behind. They cannot catch up in school because teachers cannot, stop an entire class to give one student individualized learning from years ago. So there is that kid who comes to us to fix their gaps, to get them back on path. Then there are these other students that are actually quite good at math, and they come to us because they want to get even further ahead. They want to come to a place filled with mathematicians and physicists and engineers where they can explore the subject that they like as a hobby. We have kids of all sorts of ranges, with all sorts of skill sets. And I'm really proud that we have that variety.
That's interesting to me that you have students who come in who are struggling, but that you also have students come in who are not struggling in math at all, who are very strong in math and just want to get even stronger.
I pretended to be bad at math so that you'd help me. But the thing is, I'm not really bad at math. I'm actually really good at math.
You mentioned a moment ago that some students come in because they're having a hard time with what they're working on in school. Do you or your team collaborate with your students' classroom teachers at all?
Not really. I wish there was a little bit more collaboration, but teachers are very busy people, and we're not really working on the same thing. We're in supplement to school. We're in service to school, but we're not doing the same thing as school for most students. For most students, we're either working on material from years past that they didn't quite master, but they need to master, or we're working ahead of grade level, but there's only this very short window where we're actually working on material that is the same as school. And that's a good thing, I think. That's why we exist. We're not just more school. We're something different and additional to school.
I really love the way that you just phrased that. And it makes me wonder, what do you feel are some of the big differences between the work that you and your staff do with your students and the work that they're doing with their teachers at school?
I think the biggest difference is just scale. Schools are necessarily large organizations, whereas we operate at a 2 or 3 to 1. And because we are running at such a low ratio, at such an intimate ratio, we're able to treat the kids as individual and give them individual attention and individual material. So when I start with a student, when I assess them, it's not about trying to establish grade level. I don't even really like that term, grade level, because it doesn't really do justice to the full scale of what a kid is capable of. But it's not about establishing grade level. It's about establishing what material is necessary for this kid. So if they do well with something, we don't cover it. We don't work on it. We only work on the gaps that they have. That would be impossible in a school setting. Like, you couldn't have a teacher that had 30 kids all working on unique things. It's just not within the scope of what a teacher can do. But it is what we do. And a lot of kids need that. They need that second chance to go back and fix the things that they didn't understand the first time.
That's a really good point. And as an elementary school teacher, I, of course, can relate to exactly what you're saying. We try very hard to differentiate instruction and to provide each student with exactly what they need, exactly when they need it. But when you're in a one-on-one setting, you have a much greater opportunity to provide that kind of on-demand instruction.
I wish the schools had the resources to do that as well. You know, maybe not within the classroom, but perhaps as an additional program to the classroom to really help the kids that are struggling. What tends to happen is that they really have to be struggling incredibly before those additional measures are put in place. But a lot of kids just need a little bit of intervention before it gets to that point. And that's, I think, where we come in.
So when you're working with a student, what is it you're looking for that signals success to you, that lets you know, we just made a breakthrough with this student, or we just got this student to the next level of understanding where we're trying to get them?
I think my goals for students are actually fairly modest. What I consider success is just taking the pain out of math for students, taking the stress out of what they're doing on a daily basis. Because if they're finding difficulty with math, this is a stress that they have almost every day of their life, and it's quite painful for them. In addition to wanting to get them to a point where they're not finding math stressful, I want to make sure that they're good enough at math that when the time comes and they're choosing options, what they want to do with their life, that they have as many options as possible, that they haven't unnecessarily closed the door to something that might give them joy as an adult.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Mathnasium curriculum?
What I really like about the Mathnasium curriculum is that originally, 20 years ago, of course, but originally it was written and created by just a single man. He's kind of like our Colonel Sanders. His name is Larry Martinick, and he put together the entire curriculum because it was put together by one very talented individual. He has a very clean, clear, simple voice. It's not like a textbook that was written by a committee. These textbooks sometimes that you get, you can tell that there have been 100 hands that have taken a part in making this textbook. They feel like this jumbled mess. There's pictures everywhere, and even the words don't necessarily flow very well. Whereas, because our material was written by this single, again, very talented man, it's just so simple. It's so straightforward, and the kids love it for that.
Jonathan, I want to thank you very much for appearing on the show today. It was wonderful getting to know you and getting to hear about the work you do with Livermore students.
I would highly recommend that program to anybody whose kid is struggling in math or just to get extra help from math. I really think it's a great program for the kids here in Livermore.
Would you like to share how can people get in touch with you if they live in the East Bay area and are thinking they might like to get some help for their children?
I think, honestly, the best thing is just to give us a call. Our number is 925-292-8854. And if they prefer not to pick up the phone and would rather email, our email is very simple. It's just livermore@mathnasium.com.
And what about our listeners who don't happen to live in the East Bay? Is there an easy place for parents to look up Mathnasium if they live in another part of the country and want to see if there's a center near them?
Absolutely. It's very simple. Mathnasium.com.
Oh, perfect. Well, Jonathan, once again, thank you so much for your time and for your wonderful comments. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
And thank you for this very interesting experience, this opportunity. I'm really appreciative.
My pleasure. And also, a big thank you to you, Math Club, for joining me during this summer without... Who in the world could that be calling now? The closing music's already rolling. Thanks for calling the Math Club. This is Noah. How can I math you? Hey, Noah, it's Pete. Pete? Are you calling from Spain? No, not that, Pete. I'm calling from a far stranger place. Florida. It's Pete Mullen. I guest hosted the last episode with you. Oh, Hey, Pete, what's up? I just figured that since we left the listeners with a puzzle at the end of that episode, you might want to talk about the solution for a few minutes. Oh, yeah. Thanks for reminding me. I almost ended the show without bringing it up. Since you're so good at reminding, would you like to remind listeners about the puzzle? Sure. This was a puzzle with 4 people: Dan, Jennifer, Kenny, and Sarah. They want to figure out how much they each weigh, but they don't have a scale. What they do have is a 2-sided balance and 3 pets whose weights are already known: a 120-pound bulldog, a 40-pound pig, and a 10-pound cat. We also mentioned that they found 4 situations in which the scale was completely balanced. That is, the same amount of weight was on both sides. For example, it's balanced with Dan and Kenny on one side and Jennifer, Sarah, and the cat on the other. We also gave 3 other scenarios in which the scale was balanced, and then asked listeners if they could determine the weights of the 4 friends. The way to solve this was to write an equation for each of the 4 situations, then use substitution to solve the system of equations. Exactly. So you could assign the variables D, J, K, and S to represent Dan, Jennifer, Kenny, and Sarah, along with B, P, and C to represent the bulldog, the pig, and the cat. Our first equation would be D plus K equals J plus S plus C, because we know that the scale showed equal weight on both sides when Dan and Kenny stood on one side and Jennifer and Sarah stood on the other side with the cat. And you could write 3 more equations using the same method, using our variables to show the equalities of the other 3 situations that were given. Then you could substitute the animals' weights in, since we also know those from the original problem. So now that first equation would be D plus K equals J plus S plus 10, since we know the cat weighs 10 pounds. To get the people's weights, you could start solving for a specific variable in one equation and then substitute its value into the other equations. By doing this a few times, you can discover the weights of each of the 4 friends. And did anyone figure it out and submit the right answer? Yeah, and I get to have a proud dad moment here for a minute, because the first person to submit the correct answer to us was actually my son, Adam King. And no nepotism here at all. He earned this shout out fair and square. I mentioned to him after a few days that we hadn't received any solutions from anyone yet, so he grabbed a pencil and paper and went and did all the necessary substitutions and determined that Dan weighs 175 pounds, Jennifer weighs 170 pounds, Kenny weighs 200 pounds, and Sarah weighs 195 pounds. So a huge math club shout out to Adam. Nicely done. Yeah. And thanks for coming back to go over that with me, Pete. No problem. And speaking of thanks, I'd like to give a huge math club thank you to Ed Meehan, who played Tootie in our opening sketch today, and another huge thank you to Tiffany Castro for sharing about her family's experience with Mathnasium. Finally, thank you, Math Club, for joining me during this Summer Without Pete. I know we're all looking forward to having him with us next time and hearing about his trip. Hey, Noah, guess what? What? I totally fooled you. I guest hosted the whole last episode and then came back for this part, and you never even knew. I never knew what? That it was me the whole time. Alexa?
That's right. What do you have to say about me guest hosting now?
Oh, good grief.